The sound of a slap echoed through the saloon, silencing the raucous crowd as Norah Campbell's palm connected with James Wilton's face. Tears streamed down her cheeks, smudging the light powder she'd applied for what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice breaking as she clutched the letter in her trembling hand. "I trusted you with everything, my heart, my father's ranch, our future." James touched his reddening cheek, his eyes darting to the crowd of onlookers who'd gathered for their engagement celebration at the Rusty Nail Saloon. "Norah, darling, it's not what you think, not what I think." Norah's voice rose as she shook the letter. "This is a deed transfer, James. You've been selling off parcels of my father's land behind my back for months, the land he died protecting during the war. It was the spring of 1873 in Wood River, Nebraska, and what should have been the beginning of Norah's happily ever after had crumbled in an instant. Her father, Colonel Henry Campbell, had been gone just 8 months, leaving his only daughter the sprawling Evergreen Ranch and apparently a fiancé who saw it as nothing but a business opportunity. "The railroad's coming, Norah," James hissed, grabbing her wrist. "I was securing our future. Your father was too stubborn to see the opportunity. Let her go," came a deep voice from the crowd. The saloon patrons parted as Ethan O'Malley stepped forward. His worn leather vest and dusty boots marked him as a working cowboy, but there was something in his steady gaze that made James release Norah's wrist instantly. "This ain't your concern, O'Malley," James spat. Ethan didn't flinch. "A man who'd steal from the woman he claims to love has no right to her hand, or her land." Norah yanked the diamond ring from her finger and threw it at James's chest. "We're finished. Stay away from me and my ranch." As she turned to leave, her legs nearly buckled beneath her. 4 years of courtship, 8 months of engagement, and a lifetime of dreams all built on lies. She barely registered Ethan O'Malley's steadying hand at her elbow, guiding her through the whispering crowd and out into the dusty main street of Wood River. "I can make it from here," she said stiffly, pulling away once they reached the hitching post where her mare waited. Ethan stepped back, respecting her space. "Miss Campbell, that man might not take your decision lightly. The railroad money's big might be worth more to him than honor." Norah laughed bitterly as she untied her horse. "Honor? Seems there's precious little of that left in this world, Mr. O'Malley." She looked at him directly for the first time, taking in his weathered face with its day-old stubble and the clear blue eyes that seemed to hold more wisdom than his 30 years would suggest. "But I thank you for your intervention." "I work cattle, not miracles," he said with a slight shrug. "But I know Evergreen Ranch is short-handed since your father passed. If you need help, I'm between jobs." "Why would I trust another man I barely know?" Norah asked, swinging up into her saddle with practiced grace despite her formal dress. "I believe I've had my fill of misplaced trust for one lifetime." Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Fair enough, but my offer stands no strings, no schemes, just honest work for honest pay." Norah gathered her reins. "I'll consider it, Mr. O'Malley." She nudged her horse forward, eager to put distance between herself and the humiliation she'd just endured. "But don't expect me to believe in promises any time soon." As she rode away, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across Wood River's main street, Norah didn't see the way Ethan watched her go. Nor did she notice James Wilton emerging from the saloon with thunder in his eyes, flanked by 2 men who wore their guns low on their hips. What she did know was that the 10-mile ride back to Evergreen would give her plenty of time to curse her own foolishness, and to wonder how she would run a struggling cattle ranch alone in a man's world that seemed determined to take everything her father had built. The spring sunset painted the Nebraska plains in gold by the time Norah reached the arched gateway of Evergreen Ranch. The carved wooden sign, weathered by years of prairie winds, swung gently above her head as she passed beneath. Her father had erected it the day they arrived from Boston in 1860, declaring that they would build something lasting in this wild place. "Miss Norah," called Miguel, their aging foreman, hurrying from the barn. His worried expression told her that news traveled fast in Wood River. "Are you all right?" Norah dismounted, handing him the reins. "I'm fine, Miguel, but I need to know exactly where we stand. How many head of cattle do we have left after the winter? How much land is actually still ours?" Miguel removed his hat, twisting it in his hands. "We've got about 200 head, miss. As for the land—" He hesitated. "Mr. Wilton had me sign some papers a few months back. Said it was just a formality while you were in mourning." The betrayal cut deeper with each revelation. "I see, and the men, how many hands do we have left?" "Just me, young Billy, and old Pete now." Miguel looked down. "The others left when their pay was late last month," Mr. Wilton said. "I understand," Norah interrupted, not wanting to hear James's name again. She smoothed her skirts, squaring her shoulders. "We'll manage, somehow." That night, as Norah sat at her father's desk in the ranch house study, poring over ledgers by lamplight, the full extent of James's deception became clear. He had systematically sold off the eastern parcels of evergreen land, nearly a third of the ranch, to railroad interests, pocketing the money while telling the hands their pay was delayed due to hard times. Her father's careful handwriting filled the earlier pages of the ledger, giving way to James's more flamboyant script after the colonel's death. Each entry felt like another betrayal. When dawn broke, Norah had barely slept, but she had made her decision. She would save what remained of Evergreen, no matter what it took. She changed from her formal dress into a practical riding skirt and blouse, braided her auburn hair tightly, and was in the barn saddling her horse when Miguel found her. "Miss Norah, you can't mean to ride into town alone," he protested. "Not after yesterday." "I need to see the bank manager and then the sheriff," she said firmly. "I have to know if there's a way to contest those land sales." Miguel shifted uncomfortably. "Sheriff Barnes is friendly with Mr. Wilton, miss. And as for the bank, let me guess," Norah said dryly. "James has connections there too." "The whole town's excited about the railroad coming through," Miguel confirmed. "Brings money, jobs. Nobody wants to cross the man making it happen." Norah cinched her saddle with a sharp tug. "Well, I'm not nobody, Miguel. I'm Henry Campbell's daughter, and I won't let his legacy be stolen by a silver-tongued thief." But Miguel's words proved prophetic. At the Wood River Bank, Manager Phillips received her with patronizing smiles and vague assurances that nothing could be done about legitimate sales with signed documents. Sheriff Barnes was even less helpful, barely looking up from his coffee as he dismissed her concerns. "Sounds like a private matter between you and your fiancé, Miss Campbell," he drawled. "Or ex-fiancé, I should say. Town's mighty sorry to hear about that unfortunate misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Norah echoed incredulously. "He forged documents and stole money," Barnes shrugged. "Got your signature right here on the witness line, madam." He turned a deed around to show her. "That your handwriting?" Norah stared at the flowing script that did indeed resemble her own. "He forged this. I never signed anything." "That's a serious accusation, Miss Campbell." The sheriff's tone hardened. "Mr. Wilton is a respected businessman in this town. Without proof, I suggest you be careful about slandering his good name." Defeated but not broken, Norah left the sheriff's office only to find herself face to face with James and two men she recognized as the Blackwell brothers, local troublemakers who do anything for the right price. Norah, James said smoothly, blocking her path to her horse. I think we should talk privately about yesterday's misunderstanding. There's nothing to discuss, she replied, trying to step around him. You're a thief and a liar, James. I want nothing more to do with you. His charming smile disappeared. You know, your father was just as stubborn. Right up until that heart of his gave out. The implied threat hung in the air between them. Is there a problem here? Came a familiar voice. Ethan O'Malley approached from the direction of the general store, a sack of supplies slung over his shoulder. James's face darkened. Still interfering where you're not wanted, O'Malley. Just passing by, Ethan said mildly, but his stance shifted subtly, ready for trouble. Miss Campbell, I was hoping to speak with you about that work we discussed. Grateful for the interruption, Norah nodded. Yes, Mr. O'Malley. In fact, I was just heading back to Evergreen if you'd care to ride along. James stepped closer, lowering his voice. This isn't over, Norah. That land is going to the railroad one way or another. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Good day, James, she replied coldly, brushing past him to her horse. The Blackwell brothers moved to follow, but Ethan blocked their path, his hand casually resting near his holstered Colt. Another time, boys, he said quietly. The look in his eyes made them reconsider, and they backed away. As Norah and Ethan rode out of town, she kept her eyes forward, unwilling to show the fear and anger roiling inside her. I gather your visit to the sheriff wasn't productive, Ethan commented after they'd put a mile between themselves and Wood River. The whole town's in James's pocket, she said bitterly. Or rather, the railroad's pocket. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. Railroad money has a way of changing people's loyalties. He glanced at her. For what it's worth, I meant what I said yesterday. I'm looking for work, and it sounds like you could use an extra hand. Norah studied him, trying to see beyond the surface. Ethan O'Malley had drifted into Wood River about 6 months ago, taking odd jobs on surrounding ranches. He kept to himself, did his work well, and avoided trouble until yesterday in the saloon. She'd seen him around town but knew little about him beyond his reputation as a skilled horseman and dependable worker. Why would you want to work for a failing ranch? She asked bluntly. Especially one with complications like mine. His blue eyes met hers directly. I've worked enough cattle spreads to know good land when I see it. Evergreen's got some of the best grazing in the territory. Seems a shame to see it carved up for railroad tracks. That doesn't answer my question, Mr. O'Malley. A faint smile touched his lips. No, I suppose it doesn't. He was quiet for a moment before continuing. I knew your father briefly during the war. I was just a young private, but Colonel Campbell saved my unit during Gettysburg. Never got to thank him properly. Surprise flickered across Norah's face. You fought in the war. You never mentioned this to my father when you came to Wood River. Some memories are best left buried, Miss Campbell, Ethan said, his voice taking on a distant quality. But I respected your father. And I respect what he built here. Norah considered this as they rode, the rolling hills of Nebraska stretching around them, spring grasses beginning to green the landscape. She needed help, that much was certain, but trusting again seemed impossible after James's betrayal. I can offer room and board plus $15 a month, she said finally. It's less than the big spreads pay, but it's all I can manage right now. That'll do, Ethan agreed easily. One more thing, Mr. O'Malley, Norah added, pulling her horse to a stop and fixing him with a determined look. I need absolute loyalty. No secrets, no schemes. Evergreen is my home, my legacy, and I'll fight to my last breath to keep it. I need to know you're with me completely or not at all. Ethan held her gaze steadily. I make only one promise, Miss Campbell, to do honest work for as long as you'll have me. Everything else has to be earned over time. Something in his straightforward answer reassured her more than flowery vows could have. "Then we have an agreement, Mr. O'Malley," she said, extending her hand. His calloused palm met hers in a firm handshake. "Ethan," he corrected. "If we're going to work together, might as well use my Christian name." "Very well," she nodded. "And I'm Norah to those who work Evergreen." As they continued toward the ranch, Norah wondered if she'd made another mistake in trusting so quickly. But with James's threats echoing in her mind and the future of Evergreen hanging by a thread, she had little choice but to accept the help offered, even if it came from a mysterious cowboy with secrets of his own. The first few days of Ethan's employment at Evergreen were a test for them both. Norah watched him carefully, looking for any sign that he might be another wolf in sheep's clothing. But Ethan proved to be exactly what he'd claimed, a hard-working cowhand who knew his business. He rose before dawn each day, took his meals quickly, and worked until sunset without complaint. Miguel, initially suspicious of the newcomer, gradually warmed to Ethan as they mended fences, repaired outbuildings, and rounded up cattle that had scattered during the understaffed winter months. Young Billy Thompson, barely 18 and eager to learn, followed Ethan like a shadow, soaking up knowledge about horses, cattle, and the subtle arts of ranch work. Even old Pete, who rarely spoke to anyone, nodded approvingly when Ethan reinforced the sagging corner of the barn in a single afternoon. On the 5th day, Norah found Ethan in the corral, working with a spirited 3-year-old gelding that had resisted breaking. "He's got fire," she observed, leaning on the fence as Ethan patiently let the chestnut horse circle him, getting used to the saddle blanket draped over his arm. "Most things worth having do," Ethan replied, never taking his eyes off the horse. His movements were slow and deliberate, his voice a constant, calming murmur. "It's not about breaking that spirit, just redirecting it." Norah watched as the horse, which had kicked at Miguel twice the previous week, gradually allowed Ethan to touch its flank with the blanket. "Where did you learn to work horses like that?" "My grandfather raised Morgans in Pennsylvania," Ethan said. "Taught me that patience wins more battles than force ever could." After another few minutes, the horse was allowing him to slide the blanket on and off its back without flinching. "That's enough for today. Always stop on a good note." As he exited the corral, Norah handed him a canteen of water. "I've been going through the ledgers," she said as he drank. "If we can get the remaining cattle to market in Kansas City by July, we might make enough to pay off the bank note that's coming due." Ethan wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "That's a hard drive with just 4 of us." "I know," she admitted. "But I don't have the money to hire more hands until we sell." He studied her face, noting the dark circles under her eyes. "When's the last time you slept a full night, Norah?" The question caught her off guard. James had never noticed or cared about such things. "I'll sleep when Evergreen is secure," she answered, straightening her shoulders. Ethan shook his head. "You can't save this place if you work yourself into the ground. Ranch needs you thinking clear." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Through the main gate came James Wilton, the Blackwell brothers, and 2 other men Norah didn't recognize. "Trouble," Ethan muttered, instinctively moving to stand slightly in front of Norah. James reined in his expensive black stallion, looking around the ranch yard with the proprietary air of a man surveying his own property. "Norah, darling, I see you've been busy." His gaze flicked to Ethan with undisguised contempt. "Hiring drifters now." "State your business and leave, James," Norah said coldly. "You're not welcome here." James sighed dramatically. "Is that any way to treat an old friend, particularly one who's come with a generous offer?" He pulled a folded document from his coat pocket. The railroad is prepared to buy the remaining Evergreen land for a very fair sum, enough to set you up comfortably in town, or perhaps back east with your mother's family. Norah's hands clenched into fists. My father didn't build this ranch so I could sell it to become a railroad siding. Your father is dead, Norah, James said bluntly. And he left you with a failing business in a changing world. The railroad is coming whether you like it or not. You can profit from it or be ruined by it. The lady's given you her answer, Ethan said quietly. James's face hardened. This doesn't concern you, O'Malley. Seems it does since I work here now. Ethan's stance was relaxed, but Norah noticed his right hand had drifted closer to his gun. The tension crackled between them until Miguel and Billy emerged from the barn, the older man carrying a shotgun casually in the crook of his arm. Old Pete appeared on the porch of the bunkhouse, a rifle in hand. James assessed the situation, then smiled thinly. Very well. I'll give you time to reconsider my generous offer. He tucked the document back into his pocket. But the bank note comes due in July, Norah. Without the spring cattle sales, how do you plan to meet it? The question hit its mark. They both knew the drought last year had reduced the herd, and with fewer hands, many calves had been lost to predators over the winter. That's my concern, not yours, Norah replied steadily. Oh, but it is my concern, James said, his voice dropping to a silky threat. You see, I've purchased that note from the bank, which means when you can't pay, and we both know you can't Evergreen Falls to me anyway. He tipped his hat mockingly. I'm just trying to save you the humiliation, my dear. As James and his men rode away, Norah felt the blood drain from her face. If what he said was true, she had less than 3 months to raise enough money to pay off a debt that had taken her father years to accumulate. Is it true? Ethan asked quietly when the riders were out of sight. About the banknote, Norah nodded grimly. $8,000, due July 15th. She laughed without humor. Might as well be $1 million for all the chance I have of raising it. Ethan considered this. 200 head won't bring that much, even at top dollar. I know. Norah turned to face the ranch house, the afternoon sun illuminating the weathered boards her father had planed by hand. But I won't give up. Not yet. That evening, as Norah sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the plains in fiery orange, Ethan joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one silently, then leaned against the porch railing. I've been thinking, he said after a while. There's a rancher over in the Dakota Territory, Thomas Green. Heard he's looking to expand his herd with good breeding stock. Norah sipped her coffee, considering. Our bloodlines are strong. Father brought in Hereford bulls from back east. Exactly, Ethan nodded. We could drive some of our best breeding stock north. Green might pay premium prices enough to make up some of what we need for that note. But that would leave us with less to drive to Kansas City, Norah pointed out. Yes, but quality might pay better than quantity right now. He looked out across the pastures where the cattle grazed in the fading light. It's a gamble, but one with better odds than hoping for a miracle. Norah studied him over the rim of her cup. Why are you doing this, Ethan? Truly? You could find work at any ranch in the territory, stable work without all this trouble. For a long moment, he was silent, his blue eyes focused on the distant horizon. Maybe I've seen too many good things destroyed by men like Wilton, he finally said. Men who measure everything by its price instead of its worth. Something in his tone made Norah wonder again about his past. You could tell me, whatever it is you're running from or trying to forget. A shadow crossed his face. We all have ghosts, Norah, but right now it's the future of Evergreen that matters. He straightened up. If we leave by the end of the week, we could reach Green's spread in 2 weeks, make the sale, and be back in plenty of time for the Kansas City drive. Norah knew he was changing the subject, but she didn't press. Instead, she found herself trusting his judgment despite her reservations. "All right, we'll select 30 head tomorrow, the best breeding stock we can spare." "I'll go," Ethan said. "You should stay here with Miguel and Pete to keep an eye on things." "Absolutely not," Norah countered firmly. "These are my cattle and my ranch. Besides, I know the bloodlines better than anyone. I'll be the one to negotiate with Green." Ethan looked like he wanted to argue, but instead nodded reluctantly. "Billy can come with us. Miguel and Pete will handle things here." As darkness settled over Evergreen, Norah felt a small spark of hope kindle within her. It was a risky plan, but it was a plan nonetheless. And for the first time since her father's death, she had someone beside her who seemed truly invested in saving her home. She just had to remind herself not to mistake professional loyalty for something deeper. She'd made that mistake with James, and her heart couldn't afford another betrayal. The next few days were a flurry of activity as they prepared for the cattle drive north. Norah and Ethan carefully selected 30 head, mostly young cows already bred, along with 2 prime bulls that represented the best of Evergreen stock. Miguel helped them prepare the chuck wagon with supplies, while Billy could barely contain his excitement at his first real drive. "Been waiting my whole life for this, Miss Norah," the young man enthused as he packed his bedroll. "Pa never thought I'd amount to a real cowhand, but Mr. O'Malley says I've got a natural seat on a horse." Norah smiled at his enthusiasm. Billy Thompson had come to work at Evergreen just before her father died, a gangly boy eager to escape his father's hardware store in Wood River. Colonel Campbell had seen potential in him, and Norah was pleased to see Ethan nurturing that same potential. The morning of their departure dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for starting a drive. As they gathered the selected cattle and prepared to move out, Miguel approached Norah with concern etched on his weathered face. "Miss Norah, I don't like you making this journey," he said frankly. "It's not safe, especially with Wilton stirring up trouble." "I'll be fine, Miguel," she assured him. "Ethan and Billy will be with me, and we'll stick to well-traveled routes." The old foreman glanced toward Ethan, who was checking the cinch on his saddle. "You trust him? A man we barely know." It was a fair question, and one Norah had asked herself repeatedly over the past week. "I trust what I've seen," she answered carefully. "He works hard, knows cattle, and hasn't given me reason to doubt him." Miguel nodded slowly. "Your father was a good judge of men. I hope you inherited that gift." He pressed something into her hand, a small derringer. "Just in case, miss." "Keep it in your pocket." Norah tucked the small gun into her skirt pocket, touched by the old man's concern. "We'll be back in 3 weeks, Miguel. Take care of Evergreen while I'm gone." As they set out, the small herd moving north at a steady pace, Norah felt a strange mixture of anxiety and exhilaration. She had grown up on Evergreen and knew every tree and stream on its lands, but she had rarely ventured far beyond its boundaries. This journey represented not just a desperate bid to save her ranch, but a step into a wider world. Ethan rode point, guiding the cattle with an easy confidence that spoke of years on the trail. Billy flanked the herd, occasionally letting out a whoop when a cow tried to stray. Norah brought up the rear with the chuck wagon, her mare tethered behind so she could alternate between riding and driving. They made good progress that first day, covering nearly 15 miles before making camp by a small creek. As Billy tended the cattle, Ethan built a fire and began preparing a simple supper from their provisions. "Where did you learn to cook?" Norah asked, watching as he skillfully mixed biscuit dough in a bowl. "Necessity," he replied with a slight smile. "A man gets tired of burned beans pretty quick out on the trail." She sat on a log near the fire, enjoying the unfamiliar feeling of having nothing to do but wait for food to be ready. At Evergreen, she was constantly moving from one task to another, managing the endless responsibilities of running a ranch. "It's beautiful out here," she said, gazing at the vast expanse of prairie bathed in the golden light of sunset. "Sometimes I get so caught up in saving Evergreen that I forget to look at it." Ethan glanced up from his cooking. "That's the trouble with fighting for something you don't always get to enjoy what you're fighting for." As darkness fell and they ate their supper under a canopy of stars, Norah found herself more at ease in Ethan's company than she had been with anyone since her father's death. There was something reassuring about his quiet competence, his lack of pretension. "Tell me about your family," she said as they sat by the fire after Billy had gone to sleep. "You mentioned your grandfather with the Morgan horses." Ethan prodded the fire with a stick. "Not much to tell. Parents died of fever when I was young. Grandfather raised me until I was 16, then passed on himself. I joined the Union Army a year later, served through the war, and have been drifting ever since. No siblings, no other family," he shook his head, "none living, and no wife waiting somewhere." The question slipped out before she could stop it. In the firelight she saw a flicker of something pain, perhaps cross his face. "No," he said softly, "not anymore." The simple response held volumes of unspoken history, and Norah knew better than to press further. "I'm sorry," she said instead. "For whatever happened." Ethan nodded his acknowledgement, then changed the subject. "We should reach the territorial border in 4 days if the weather holds. From there, it's another week to Green's ranch." They settled into a routine over the next few days. Rise before dawn. Move the cattle until midday, rest during the hottest hours, then push on until dusk. The rhythm of the trail was soothing in its simplicity, and Norah found herself sleeping better under the stars than she had in her own bed for months. On the 4th night, as they camped near a small stand of cottonwoods, Ethan took first watch while Norah and Billy slept. She awoke sometime past midnight to find Billy snoring softly nearby, but Ethan's bedroll empty. Concerned, she rose quietly and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders against the night chill. She found him sitting on a fallen log at the edge of their camp, staring at something in his hands. As she approached, he quickly tucked whatever it was into his shirt pocket. "You should be sleeping," he said without turning. "Your watch isn't for another hour." "Couldn't sleep," she replied, settling beside him on the log. "Too many thoughts." Above them, the moon cast silver light across the endless prairie, creating a landscape that seemed both intimate and infinite. "Having second thoughts about the drive?" Ethan asked. Norah shook her head. "No, but I keep thinking about what James said about owning the bank note. Even if we sell these cattle at a good price, it might not be enough." "One step at a time," Ethan advised. "First we make this sale, then we see where we stand." They sat in companionable silence for a while before Norah spoke again. "You never told me how you knew my father." Ethan's shoulders tensed slightly. "I mentioned we served together briefly during the war." "Yes, but there's more to it, isn't there?" she pressed gently. "You didn't just happen to drift into Wood River by chance." He was quiet for so long that Norah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured, as if carefully choosing each word. "I was with the 19th Maine at Gettysburg. Young, scared, and in way over my head. During Pickett's charge, our position was nearly overrun. Your father's unit came to reinforce us just when we were about to break." He paused, his eyes fixed on some distant memory. "A Confederate officer had me at sword point. Colonel Campbell shot him, then pulled me to my feet and told me to keep fighting, that the day wasn't lost yet." Norah could almost hear her father's voice in those words. Henry Campbell had been a man who never gave up, never accepted defeat. "After the war," Ethan continued, I drifted west like a lot of soldiers who couldn't settle back into civilian life. Last year, I read about Colonel Campbell establishing a successful ranch in Nebraska. Thought I might pay my respects, maybe find work nearby. His voice softened. By the time I got to Wood River, he was already gone. Why didn't you tell me this before? Norah asked. Ethan finally turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. Would it have made a difference? Would you have trusted me more because of something that happened a decade ago? Perhaps, she admitted. I didn't want your trust based on your father's judgment, he said simply. I wanted to earn it myself. The honesty of his answer touched something in Norah. Since James's betrayal, she had armored herself against emotion, focusing solely on saving Evergreen. But sitting here in the moonlight, she felt that armor beginning to crack. There's something else, she said hesitantly. Something you're not telling me. Ethan looked away back toward the sleeping herd. We all have parts of our past we'd rather leave buried, Norah. Is it something that could affect Evergreen? Or this drive? When he didn't immediately answer, she added, I need to know if there's trouble following you, Ethan. He sighed heavily. No trouble that would find us here. I promise you that. It wasn't a complete answer, but something in his tone told her it was all she would get tonight. She stood, drawing her blanket closer around her shoulders. I'll take over the watch. You should get some sleep. As she turned to walk away, his voice stopped her. Norah. She looked back to find him watching her, an unreadable expression on his face. Thank you, he said quietly, for trusting me this far. She nodded once before moving to sit by the fire, her mind filled with new questions about the mysterious cowboy who seemed determined to help her save her father's legacy, and perhaps, though she hardly dared admit it, her own heart as well. The remainder of their journey to Thomas Green's ranch was uneventful, though Norah found herself watching Ethan with new awareness after their midnight conversation. There was clearly more to his story than he had shared, but his dedication to getting their cattle safely to market never wavered. They crossed into Dakota territory on a bright morning, the landscape gradually changing from the rolling plains of Nebraska to more rugged country. Billy's excitement grew as they traveled farther than he had ever been before, and even Norah felt a sense of adventure despite the serious purpose of their journey. Mr. Green's spread should be just beyond that ridge, Ethan said late one afternoon, pointing to a distant line of hills. We'll make camp here tonight and present ourselves properly in the morning. That evening, Norah took extra care with her appearance, washing her face and hands in the creek and changing into the one clean shirt she had packed. As owner of Evergreen, she wanted to make a good impression on Thomas Green, to be seen as a serious rancher rather than a woman in over her head. Nervous? Ethan asked as he joined her by the fire, noting her freshly braided hair. Determined, she corrected. I need this sale, Ethan. He nodded, understanding. Green's known to be fair, if a bit hard-nosed in negotiations. Don't let him think you're desperate, even if you are. I've negotiated cattle sales before, she reminded him. Father made sure I understood every aspect of running Evergreen. I don't doubt it, Ethan said with a slight smile. Just offering advice. The next morning, they drove their small herd toward Green's ranch, which proved to be an impressive operation sprawling across a fertile valley. A large main house, several barns, and numerous outbuildings spoke of prosperity and permanence. As they approached, several riders came out to meet them, led by a broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair whom Norah guessed to be Thomas Green himself. That's far enough, the man called as they drew near. State your business. Ethan raised a hand in greeting. Thomas Green. I'm Ethan O'Malley. This is Miss Norah Campbell of Evergreen Ranch in Nebraska Territory. We've brought breeding stock you might be interested in purchasing. Green studied them carefully, his eyes lingering on Norah with evident surprise at finding a woman leading a cattle drive. "Campbell. Any relation to Colonel Henry Campbell, my father," Norah replied, straightening in her saddle. Something like respect flickered across Green's weathered face. "Met him once at a livestock auction in Omaha. Fine judge of horseflesh." He gestured toward a large corral near one of the barns. "Bring your herd in there so I can have a proper look." Over the next hour, Thomas Green inspected their cattle with the thoroughness of a man who had built his fortune on understanding quality. He asked pointed questions about bloodlines, feeding practices, and calving histories, which Norah answered confidently, drawing on her lifetime of experience at Evergreen. "These are fine animals," Green finally acknowledged, resting his arms on the corral fence. "What's your asking price, Miss Campbell?" Norah named a figure that was ambitious but not unreasonable, bracing herself for the inevitable negotiation. To her surprise, Green simply nodded. "That's fair, considering the quality. I'll take them all." He extended his hand to seal the deal. As they shook, Norah felt a rush of relief. The price Green had agreed to wouldn't cover the entire banknote, but it would make a significant dent. "You've come a long way," Green said as they walked toward the main house. "I insist you and your men stay the night. My wife would never forgive me for sending guests back on the trail without a proper meal." That evening, seated at the Greens' dining table with real china and home-cooked food, Norah felt some of the weight lift from her shoulders. Mrs. Green, a kind-faced woman with lively eyes, treated them as honored guests rather than trail-dusty cowboys. "It's so refreshing to meet a young woman running her own ranch," she said warmly to Norah, "though it must be challenging in such a man's world." "It has its difficulties," Norah admitted, "but Evergreen is worth fighting for." Across the table, Ethan was engaged in conversation with Thomas Green about cattle markets and the coming railroad. Billy sat wide-eyed at his first formal dinner, carefully copying Ethan's table manners. Later, as they prepared to retire to the guest rooms Mrs. Green had prepared, Ethan found Norah on the porch, gazing at the stars. "You did well today," he said, coming to stand beside her. "Green respected you from the start. That's not easy to earn from a man like him." "It feels like the first thing that's gone right in months," she replied, "but we still need more to pay off that note." "We'll get there," Ethan assured her. "One step at a time, remember?" She turned to look at him, studying his profile in the moonlight. "You say we as if Evergreen's future is your concern too." "Isn't it?" he asked simply. Before she could respond, the door opened behind them as Mrs. Green came out with an extra blanket. "The nights get chilly here," she explained, handing it to Norah. "Oh, and I nearly forgot there was a rider through here 2 days ago asking after a man and woman driving cattle north from Nebraska. Said he was delivering an urgent message." Norah and Ethan exchanged concerned glances. "Did he leave a name?" Ethan asked casually. "No, but he wore a fine coat and had quite the air about him, riding a black horse if I recall correctly." Mrs. Green smiled apologetically. "I told him we hadn't seen anyone matching that description." After their hostess had gone back inside, Norah whispered, "James, it has to be." Ethan's expression hardened. "He's persistent, I'll give him that." He considered for a moment. "We should leave at first light, take a different route back than we came. You think he might try to intercept us?" "I think a man willing to forge documents and steal land wouldn't stop at much," Ethan replied grimly. "Especially with the money we're carrying now." The realization that James might resort to outright robbery, or worse, sent a chill through Norah that had nothing to do with the night air. "I've been a fool," she murmured, "thinking I could just sell some cattle and pay him off like any honest creditor." "You're not a fool," Ethan said firmly. You're fighting for what's yours against a man with no honor. There's courage in that, Norah." His words warmed something inside her, a feeling she had thought long extinguished after James's betrayal. But she quickly tamped it down, reminding herself that admiration and loyalty weren't the same as the deeper emotions she had once mistakenly believed in. True to their plan, they departed the Green Ranch before sunrise the next morning, leaving with Thomas Green's payment safely secured in Norah's saddlebags, and his promise to recommend Evergreen stock to other ranchers in the territory. Instead of retracing their route south, Ethan led them on a more westerly path that would eventually curve back toward Nebraska. The journey would take a few days longer, but would hopefully avoid any encounter with James or his hired men. For 3 days they made good progress, though the terrain was rougher than their outward journey. On the 4th day, as they made camp by a small stream, Ethan seemed increasingly alert, frequently scanning the horizon. "Is something wrong?" Norah asked as he returned from scouting the area around their campsite. "Not sure," he replied, his expression troubled. "Thought I saw dust from riders a few miles back, but it could be nothing." Billy, who was tending the fire, looked up nervously. "You think it's Mr. Wilton, sir?" "Let's not borrow trouble," Ethan said, though his hand rested near his holstered gun. "But we'll set watches tonight, just to be safe." That night, as Norah tried to sleep during Ethan's watch, her hand kept straying to the small derringer Miguel had given her. The weight of Green's payment, enough to give Evergreen a fighting chance, felt both precious and dangerous. She must have eventually drifted off, because she awoke with a start to Ethan's hand on her shoulder. "Riders coming," he whispered urgently. "At least 4 of them, moving fast." Billy was already up, looking terrified but determined as he checked his rifle. The eastern sky showed the first hint of dawn, casting just enough light to see by. "What do we do?" Norah asked, quickly pulling on her boots. "We make for that stand of trees," Ethan decided, pointing to a small copse about a 1/4 mile away. "Better defensive position than open ground." They hastily packed their most essential supplies and mounted up, moving as quickly and quietly as possible toward the trees. They had barely reached the edge of the copse when the riders appeared on the ridge behind them: James, the Blackwell brothers, and another man Norah didn't recognize. "There they are," James shouted, spurring his horse forward. "Get into the trees," Ethan ordered, drawing his revolver. "I'll hold them off." "I'm not leaving you out here alone," Norah objected, pulling out her derringer. Ethan's eyes flashed with a mixture of frustration and admiration. "Stubborn woman," he muttered. "Billy, get behind that fallen log with Miss Campbell. I'll try to talk them down first." As James and his men approached, Ethan positioned himself at the edge of the trees, his gun held casually but ready. "That's far enough, Wilton," he called when the riders were about 50 yards away. James reined in, signaling his companions to do the same. "O'Malley," he sneered. "Still playing protector to the lady? How touching." "State your business and move on," Ethan said coldly. "We've got nothing to discuss with you." James laughed, the sound carrying clearly in the morning air. "Oh, but we do. You see, I believe Miss Campbell is carrying a substantial sum that rightfully belongs to me, as holder of the Evergreen mortgage. The note isn't due until July," Norah called from her position. "Any money I have is mine until then." "Such technicalities," James sighed dramatically. "The fact is, my dear, you're going to fail. The railroad is coming through Evergreen land whether you like it or not. I'm simply offering to make the transition less painful by robbing us." Ethan's voice was dangerously quiet. "That's a hanging offense, Wilton." One of the Blackwell brothers spat on the ground. "Ain't robbery if it's collecting a debt." "This doesn't have to get messy," James said smoothly. "Just hand over the money and we'll be on our way. No one needs to get hurt." Ethan's stance didn't waver. Not happening. Turn around and ride out while you still can. James's pleasant expression hardened. 4 guns against 2 and whatever little pea-shooter Norah might be carrying. Those aren't odds I'd bet on, O'Malley. I've faced worse, Ethan replied evenly. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then James gave a nearly imperceptible nod, and the Blackwell brothers went for their guns. What happened next unfolded with shocking speed. Ethan fired twice in rapid succession, hitting one Blackwell in the shoulder and the other's horse, sending the animal rearing and the rider tumbling to the ground. The 4th man got off a wild shot that splintered a tree trunk near Norah's head. Billy, displaying unexpected courage, fired his rifle and struck the 4th man in the leg. James, seeing his companions wounded and his advantage evaporating, turned his horse to flee. "Oh no you don't," Norah muttered, taking careful aim with her derringer. She fired, the small bullet striking James's saddle horn and causing his horse to shy violently. James lost his balance and fell heavily, landing with a grunt of pain. Within moments, it was over. The uninjured Blackwell was helping his brother back onto his horse while the 4th man clutched his bleeding leg. James sat in the dust, his fine coat filthy and his expression one of shocked disbelief. Ethan advanced on him, gun still raised. "You're done here, Wilton. Go back to Wood River and stay away from Evergreen and Miss Campbell." James glared up at him with naked hatred. "This isn't over, O'Malley, not by a long shot." "Maybe not," Ethan agreed coldly, "but today it is." He gestured with his gun. "Get on your horse and ride out." As James and his wounded companions retreated, Norah approached Ethan, her heart still racing from the confrontation. "Are you all right?" he nodded, holstering his weapon. "Fine. You and Billy?" "We're okay," she assured him, then looked at the retreating figures with concern. "But they'll be back, won't they? James won't give up." "Probably not," Ethan admitted, "but we've bought some time, and now we know for certain what he's willing to do." Billy joined them, his young face pale but proud. "Did you see me shoot that feller, Miss Norah?" "Just like Mr. O'Malley taught me." Despite the gravity of the situation, Norah couldn't help but smile at his enthusiasm. "You were very brave, Billy. Both of you were." As they gathered their belongings and prepared to continue their journey home, Norah found herself watching Ethan with new eyes. The calm skill with which he had handled the confrontation spoke of experience beyond that of an ordinary ranch hand. Once again, she wondered about the parts of his past he kept hidden. But one thing was becoming increasingly clear. Whatever secrets Ethan O'Malley might be keeping, his commitment to protecting her and Evergreen was genuine. And that realization stirred feelings in her heart that she had sworn never to allow again after James's betrayal. The journey back to Evergreen was tense but uneventful. They traveled cautiously, taking turns on watch at night and choosing routes that offered good visibility. The encounter with James and his men had shaken them all, but it had also forged a stronger bond between them. As they finally crested the ridge overlooking Evergreen Ranch 10 days after leaving Green's place, Norah felt a surge of emotion. The white-painted ranch house, the sturdy barn, the grazing cattle in the distance, all of it represented home in a way that went beyond mere ownership. "Never gets old, does it?" Ethan commented, noting her expression as they paused to take in the view. "Coming back to your own land." "No, it doesn't," she agreed softly, "especially when you fought for it." They rode down to the ranch yard, where Miguel came rushing out to greet them, relief evident on his weathered face. "Miss Norah, thank God you're back safe." He helped her down from her horse. "We've been worried since those men came through asking about you." "James and his gang," Norah confirmed grimly. "We had a run-in with them on the way back from Green's ranch. Miguel's eyes widened as they quickly filled him in on both the successful sale and the subsequent confrontation. "That snake," he muttered. "No respect for anything but money." "Has there been trouble here?" Ethan asked, scanning the ranch for signs of disturbance. "No trouble," Miguel assured them. "But there's news from town. The railroad surveyors have been marking lines right along our eastern border." Norah frowned. "But that's not the route they originally planned. They were supposed to go through the Henderson property, miles from here." "Seems plans have changed," Miguel said meaningfully. "And there's more. Sheriff Barnes has been asking questions about Mr. O'Malley here, where he came from, who he used to ride with." Ethan's expression remained neutral, but Norah saw his shoulders tense slightly. "Wilton's doing, no doubt," he said. "Trying to discredit me." Miguel gave him a searching look. "Is there anything to find, Mr. O'Malley?" "Nothing that concerns Evergreen," Ethan replied firmly. That evening, after Billy had enthusiastically recounted their adventures to old Pete, Norah sat at her father's desk counting out Thomas Green's payment. The substantial sum gave her a measure of hope, but even combined with their remaining funds, it wouldn't cover the entire bank note. A knock at the study door interrupted her calculations. Ethan stood in the doorway, his expression serious. "May I come in?" he asked. Norah nodded, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "I was just working on our finances. The sale to Green helps tremendously, but we're still short." "I figured as much," Ethan said, settling into the chair. He seemed unusually tense, his usual easy confidence replaced by a certain rigidity. "There's something I need to tell you, Norah, something I should have told you before." The gravity of his tone made her heart beat faster. "What is it?" Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "James will try to use it against you, so you should hear it from me first." He took a deep breath. "After the war, before I came west, I rode with a man named Samuel Drake." The name hung in the air between them. Samuel Drake was infamous, a former Union officer who had turned outlaw after the war, leading a gang that robbed banks and trains across Missouri and Kansas before he was killed in a shootout 5 years ago. "You were part of Drake's gang?" Norah asked quietly, struggling to reconcile this revelation with the honorable man she had come to know. "For about a year," Ethan admitted, holding her gaze steadily. "I was young, angry, couldn't settle back into normal life after what I'd seen in the war. Drake had been my captain, someone I respected. He made it sound like we were just taking back from the profiteers who'd gotten rich while soldiers died." "But you left," Norah stated rather than asked. Ethan nodded. "A job went bad. Drake shot a bank teller, an old man who wasn't even resisting. I realized then what we'd become." His voice grew distant with the memory. "I took my share from that job and rode away that night, used the money to buy land in Colorado, tried to start fresh." "What happened to the land?" Norah asked, noting the past tense. A shadow crossed Ethan's face. "I married a local girl, Emma. We built a small ranch, we're starting to make it work." He paused, and Norah could see the effort it took for him to continue. 2 years later, the sheriff from a town we'd robbed tracked me down, recognized me from wanted posters." Norah felt a chill. "Was he there to arrest you?" "He wasn't interested in justice," Ethan said bitterly. "Just revenge. I was out checking fences when he came to the house. Emma told him I wasn't the man he was looking for. He didn't believe her." The implication hung heavy in the air. Norah's hand went to her mouth. "Oh, Ethan. By the time I got back, the house was burning. Emma was." He couldn't finish the sentence. "The sheriff was gone. I buried my wife and tracked him for 6 months before I found him in a Kansas saloon." "Did you kill him?" Norah asked directly, needing to know the full truth. Ethan's eyes met hers unflinchingly. "I wanted to, had my gun on him, finger on the trigger." He shook his head slowly. But I couldn't do it, couldn't become what he was, what Drake had been. Instead, I marched him to the local marshal's office and told what he'd done. Last I heard, he was serving 20 years in prison. And you've been drifting ever since, Norah concluded softly. Until I came to Wood River, Ethan confirmed. I truly did want to thank your father, but I was also looking for, I don't know, redemption maybe, a purpose again. Norah was silent for a long moment, processing everything she'd heard. The man sitting before her had been an outlaw, had ridden with one of the most notorious gangs of the post-war years. Yet he had also walked away from that life, tried to build something honest, and even when faced with his wife's murderer, had chosen justice over vengeance. "Why tell me now?" she finally asked. "Because James will find out if he hasn't already," Ethan replied. "The sheriff asking questions in town is just the beginning. James will use my past to try to turn you against me, to discredit anything I say or do to help you save Evergreen." His jaw tightened, and I couldn't bear for you to hear it from him first, to think I'd deliberately hidden it from you. The honesty of his answer touched Norah deeply. Despite her resolution to guard her heart, she found herself moved by his vulnerability, his willingness to risk her rejection by revealing his darkest secrets. "Thank you for telling me," she said quietly, "for trusting me with the truth." Relief washed over Ethan's face. "You're not asking me to leave. Do you want to leave?" she countered. "No," he said simply. "I want to help you save Evergreen. I want to see you stand victorious against men like Wilton who think everything and everyone has a price." He hesitated, then added softly, "And I want to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me." In that moment, looking into Ethan's earnest blue eyes, Norah felt something shift within her heart. The walls she had built after James's betrayal didn't exactly crumble, but a small breach appeared, a willingness to believe that perhaps not all men were like James Wilton. That trust, once broken, could possibly be rebuilt. "Then stay," she said, surprised by the emotion in her own voice. "Help me fight for Evergreen." The smile that crossed Ethan's face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "I promise you, Norah Campbell, that I will stand by your side as long as you'll have me." He held out his hand across the desk. "That's one promise I intend to keep." As their hands met, Norah felt a spark that had nothing to do with business arrangements or ranch management. It was the spark of possibility, of a future she had stopped allowing herself to imagine after James's betrayal. And despite all her caution, all her hard-won skepticism, she found herself wanting to believe in that possibility once again. The following weeks brought a flurry of activity to Evergreen as they prepared for the larger cattle drive to Kansas City. With the money from Green's purchase secured, Norah was able to hire 4 additional hands, experienced cowboys, recommended by neighboring ranchers who respected her father's legacy. The new men integrated well with the existing crew, especially after Billy regaled them with slightly embellished tales of their journey north and the confrontation with James Wilton. Ethan took on the role of unofficial foreman, organizing the roundup of the remaining cattle and planning the drive route. Norah found herself watching him often as he worked, the easy way he sat a horse, the patient manner in which he instructed young Billy, the quiet authority he commanded without ever raising his voice. Despite knowing his troubled past, or perhaps because of it, she found her admiration for him growing daily. One evening, as they sat on the porch after supper, going over maps for the upcoming drive, Norah broached a subject that had been on her mind. "Have you thought about what you'll do after the drive?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. "Once the bank note is paid off, assuming we make enough from the Kansas City sale." Ethan looked up from the map spread between them. "Honestly, I haven't thought that far ahead. Been focused on getting there first." Of course, she said quickly, inexplicably disappointed by his noncommittal answer. I just wondered if you had other plans, places you wanted to go. He studied her face in the fading light. Are you asking if I intend to move on, Norah? The directness of his question caught her off guard. I suppose I am. You've been drifting a long time by your own admission. True enough, he acknowledged. But a man can grow tired of drifting. He hesitated, then added softly, especially when he finds a place worth staying for. The implication in his words made Norah's heart beat faster. Evergreen could use a permanent foreman, she said, keeping her eyes on the map. Someone who knows cattle and men, someone I trust. Ethan's hand covered hers on the map, warm and calloused. Is that what you're offering, a job? Norah finally looked up, meeting his gaze. For now, she said honestly, I'm still healing, Ethan, from James's betrayal, from realizing how blind I was. You weren't blind, he said firmly. You were trusting. There's a difference. Nevertheless, she continued, I need time to be sure of my own judgment again. Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then I accept the position of foreman at Evergreen Ranch, he said formally, though his smile softened the words. And I'll wait as long as it takes for you to be sure, Norah Campbell. The simple promise, spoken with such sincerity, wrapped around Norah's heart like a warm blanket. It asked nothing of her, but offered everything she hadn't dared hope for: patience, understanding, and the chance to heal at her own pace. Thank you, she whispered, turning her hand beneath his to intertwine their fingers briefly. The moment was interrupted by Miguel calling from the barn about a mare about to foal, but the understanding that had passed between them remained, a fragile new beginning built on honesty and mutual respect. 2 days before they were scheduled to leave for Kansas City, Norah rode into Wood River to purchase final supplies for the drive. She had avoided town since her confrontation with James at the saloon, sending Miguel or Billy when necessities were needed. But with preparations for the drive in full swing, she needed to personally select provisions and arrange for mail delivery during their absence. The general store was busy when she arrived, filled with the usual mix of ranchers, farmers, and townspeople. Conversation stuttered to a halt as she entered, then resumed in hushed tones. Norah held her head high, ignoring the whispers as she handed her supply list to Mr. Peterson, the proprietor. Good morning, Miss Campbell, Peterson said with forced joviality. Haven't seen you in town for some time. I've been occupied at Evergreen, she replied politely. We're driving cattle to Kansas City this week. Peterson nodded, scanning her list. Ambitious undertaking, especially with all the changes coming to the area. Changes. Norah prompted, though she suspected she knew what he meant. The railroad, of course. Peterson leaned closer across the counter. They've already started clearing land just east of your property line. Once the tracks are laid, Wood River will never be the same. Property values will soar. He looked meaningfully at her. Smart landowners are positioning themselves accordingly. I see, Norah said coolly. Well, Evergreen has been positioning cattle for market, which is why I need these supplies. As Peterson gathered her order, the bell over the door jingled and Sheriff Barnes entered. His eyes narrowed when he spotted Norah. Miss Campbell, he greeted her with a tip of his hat. Just the person I wanted to see. Sheriff, she acknowledged stiffly. What can I do for you? Barnes moved closer, lowering his voice. I understand you've taken on Ethan O'Malley as your foreman. Might want to reconsider that decision. And why would that be? Norah asked, though she already knew what was coming. Man has a past, Barnes said, watching her reaction carefully. Rode with Sam Drake after the war. Robbed banks, trains. Even if he's gone straight since then, that kind of history follows a man. Norah met his gaze steadily. Mr. O'Malley has been nothing but honest and hardworking since he came to Evergreen. His past is his own concern. Barnes raised an eyebrow. So he told you about Drake, about what happened to his wife in Colorado? Yes, he did, Norah replied, surprised to find her voice completely steady. Unlike some men in this town, Mr. O'Malley doesn't deal in secrets or deception. The sheriff's face hardened at the implied criticism. Just doing my duty, Miss Campbell, warning you about a dangerous man. Would be a shame if your association with him caused problems for Evergreen. The only problem Evergreen has, Norah said deliberately, is with people trying to steal land my father worked his entire life to build. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have preparations to complete. She paid Peterson for her supplies, arranged for them to be loaded in her wagon, and left the store with her head high despite the weight of eyes following her. As she untied her horse from the hitching post, a voice called her name. Miss Campbell, a moment please. Norah turned to see Thomas Wagner, the telegraph operator, hurrying toward her. Wagner was one of the few people in Wood River who had always dealt fairly with her father, and his worried expression caught her attention. What is it, Mr. Wagner? Wagner glanced around nervously before speaking in a hushed tone. I thought you should know Mr. Wilton has been sending and receiving frequent telegrams to someone in Topeka. A man named Harrington with the Central Pacific Railroad. Norah frowned. Is that unusual? James is involved with the railroad's land acquisition. It's the content that concerns me, Wagner continued. I don't make a habit of reading messages, you understand, but sometimes one can't help noticing. He hesitated, then plunged ahead. There's been talk of rerouting the line directly through Evergreen property. Not just the eastern parcels already sold, but cutting through the heart of your ranch. A cold dread settled in Norah's stomach. That would divide Evergreen in half, make it impossible to run cattle. Exactly, Wagner nodded grimly. And from what I've gathered, the plan is to proceed whether you sell willingly or not. There's talk of having the land condemned for public use if necessary. They can't do that, Norah protested, though uncertainty crept into her voice. Can they? Wagner shrugged helplessly. The railroad has powerful friends in the territorial government. I just thought you should be warned. Your father was good to my family when we first came to Wood River. I owe him this much at least. Norah thanked him sincerely, her mind racing with this new information as she mounted her horse. The threat to Evergreen was even greater than she had realized. If the railroad could simply take her land through condemnation, even paying off the bank note might not be enough to save her home. She rode back to Evergreen with a heavy heart, the beautiful June day suddenly seeming darker despite the clear sky. As the ranch came into view, however, a strange determination replaced her fear. This land, her father's dream, her heritage, her future, was worth fighting for. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel she was fighting alone. Ethan was breaking a young horse in the corral when she arrived, his movements fluid and confident as he guided the spirited animal. He looked up as she approached, his smile fading when he saw her expression. What happened? He asked, immediately handing the horse off to one of the new hands and coming to meet her. As they walked toward the house, Norah told him about her conversations with Sheriff Barnes and Thomas Wagner. Ethan listened intently, his face growing increasingly grave. Condemnation is a real threat, he acknowledged when she finished. I've seen it happen in other territories. Once the government decides the railroad is in the public interest, individual landowners have little recourse. So even if we pay off the note, we could still lose Evergreen. Norah asked, the unfairness of it making her voice shake with anger. Ethan was quiet for a moment, thinking. Not necessarily, he finally said. There might be a way to protect at least the heart of the ranch, but it would mean changing our plans. How so? Instead of driving all the cattle to Kansas City, we could take half the herd and head west to Cheyenne, Ethan explained. The Union Pacific has its terminus there, and they are in direct competition with Central Pacific. If we could get a meeting with their land agent, convince them that an alternative route through the Henderson property would be more advantageous. We'd be playing one railroad against the other, Norah realized, a glimmer of hope kindling within her. It's risky, Ethan cautioned. We'd be splitting our forces, potentially getting caught in a corporate war between powerful interests, and we'd still need to make enough from both cattle sales to pay off the bank note. Norah considered the risks carefully. It would mean dividing their already small crew, sending Miguel with half the hands to Kansas City while she and Ethan took the rest to Cheyenne. It would mean a longer, potentially more dangerous journey, but it might also be Evergreen's only chance. Let's do it, she decided. Miguel can handle the Kansas City drive, and I trust you to guide us to Cheyenne. Ethan studied her face, concern evident in his eyes. It won't be an easy journey, Norah, and there's no guarantee the Union Pacific will be interested. Nothing about saving Evergreen has been easy, she replied with a determined smile. Why start expecting it now? That evening, they gathered the entire crew to explain the change in plans. Miguel, though initially resistant to being separated from Norah, eventually agreed that the strategy made sense. I'll get top dollar in Kansas City, Miss Norah, don't you worry, the old foreman promised. Those cattle buyers won't know what hit them. Billy, to his immense pride, was assigned to accompany Norah and Ethan to Cheyenne along with two of the new hands. As the men dispersed to make preparations for the revised plan, Ethan pulled Norah aside. There's one more thing we need to consider, he said quietly. If James Wilton gets wind of our plan, he might try to stop us, particularly the Cheyenne group, since we'd be directly threatening his arrangement with Central Pacific. You think he'd resort to violence again? Norah asked, remembering their confrontation on the return from Dakota Territory. I think a man who's already tried once might try again, especially with higher stakes, Ethan replied gravely. We should leave quietly, a day earlier than planned. Let Miguel make a show of preparations for the Kansas City drive to draw attention while we slip away westward. The wisdom of this precaution became apparent the very next day when Sheriff Barnes rode out to Evergreen, ostensibly to check on reports of cattle rustling in the area. His eyes narrowed suspiciously as he watched the busy preparations around the ranch. Big drive, he commented to Norah as she came out of the barn. Kansas City market must be looking promising. We hope so, she replied noncommittally. Is there something specific I can help you with, Sheriff? Barnes dismounted, hooking his thumbs in his belt. Just keeping an eye on things, Miss Campbell, ensuring the peace is kept. His gaze drifted to where Ethan was working with the cattle. Your new foreman settling in well, I see. Very well, thank you, Norah said coolly. Now, if you'll excuse me, we have preparations to complete. Just one more thing, Barnes said, his voice hardening slightly. I'd advise against any creative solutions to your situation with the railroad. Central Pacific has the full support of the territorial authorities, and interfering with progress could have serious consequences. The thinly veiled threat confirmed Norah's suspicions. James had indeed learned of their plans, or at least suspected them, and was using his influence to try to intimidate her. I appreciate your concern, Sheriff, she replied with feigned innocence. But Evergreen is simply focused on getting our cattle to market before the bank note comes due. Nothing more creative than that, I assure you. Barnes didn't look convinced, but he had no pretext to linger further. As he rode away, Norah sought out Ethan, who had been watching the exchange from a distance. "You were right," she told him urgently. "We need to leave tonight, not tomorrow. James knows something's afoot." Ethan nodded grimly. "I'll tell the men. We'll be ready to move by midnight." Under cover of darkness, with only the stars to guide them, Norah, Ethan, Billy, and the two New Hands brothers named Frank and Thomas Sullivan drove 100 head of Evergreen's best cattle westward, leaving Miguel to manage the more visible drive to Kansas City, scheduled to depart the following day. As Norah looked back one last time at the shadowy outline of the ranch house, a mixture of fear and determination filled her heart. She was risking everything on this gamble: her home, her future, perhaps even her safety. But with Ethan riding steadily beside her, his presence solid and reassuring in the darkness, she found herself believing that perhaps some risks were worth taking, and some promises worth trusting after all. The journey to Cheyenne was arduous, but largely uneventful for the first week. They kept to less traveled routes, avoiding main roads where James's men might be watching. The cattle moved at a steady pace, and the small crew worked well together, with Billy continuing to grow in confidence under Ethan's guidance. On the 8th day, as they made camp near a small stream in western Nebraska, Ethan returned from scouting ahead with troubling news. "There's a Union Pacific track crew about 5 miles west," he reported as they sat around the campfire. "They're laying new line that wasn't on our maps." "Does that affect our route?" Norah asked, concerned. Ethan nodded grimly. "The line cuts directly across our planned trail. We'll have to either cross the construction zone, which would be difficult with the cattle, or detour nearly 20 miles north." "The detour would cost us precious days," Norah noted, calculating the time remaining before the bank note came due. "Days we don't have." "There's another option," Frank Sullivan suggested. "We could approach the track foreman, see if they'd be willing to pause work long enough for us to move the herd across." It was a reasonable suggestion, and the next morning, Ethan rode ahead to negotiate with the construction crew. He returned 2 hours later with mixed news. "The foreman's willing to give us a window tomorrow morning," he reported. "But there's something else. He mentioned that Central Pacific land agents have been through the area recently, talking about a competing line coming up from the south." "James's people," Norah surmised. "Most likely," Ethan agreed. "Which means they could be closer than we thought. The foreman also said there's a Union Pacific executive in Cheyenne right now, a man named Philip Garrison, who oversees land acquisition for the entire Western Division." Norah's eyes widened. "That's perfect. Exactly the person we need to speak with. If we can get to him before James's people realize what we're doing," Ethan cautioned. The crossing of the construction zone the next morning went smoothly thanks to the cooperation of the track foreman. As they drove the cattle across the partially laid tracks, Norah marveled at the scale of the operation: dozens of men working in coordinated precision to extend the iron road ever westward. "It's incredible," she admitted to Ethan as they watched the last of their herd safely cross. "I understand why people are so excited about the railroad. It's just not worth destroying everything your father built," Ethan finished for her. She nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Progress is inevitable, I know that. But surely there's a way for the new and the old to coexist, for the railroad to come through without obliterating ranches like Evergreen." "That's exactly what we're going to propose to Garrison," Ethan said confidently. "A compromise that benefits everyone." They pushed on toward Cheyenne with renewed urgency, making good time across the high plains. The landscape grew more rugged as they approached the Wyoming territory, with the distant silhouette of mountains visible on the western horizon. 4 days later, they crested a rise to see Cheyenne spread before them, a bustling railroad town that had sprung up almost overnight when the Union Pacific declared it a division point. The sounds of construction, the smoke from numerous chimneys, and the gleaming rails stretching east and west were visible even from a distance. "It's bigger than I expected," Norah remarked as they surveyed the town. "Railroad towns grow fast," Ethan explained. "A year ago, this was barely a settlement. Now look at it." They decided to make camp outside town, leaving the Sullivan brothers to watch the herd while Norah, Ethan, and Billy rode in to seek an audience with Philip Garrison. The streets of Cheyenne were crowded with a diverse mix of railroad workers, cowboys, merchants, and the usual assortment of saloon girls and gamblers drawn to a boom town. After asking directions from a friendly shopkeeper, they located the Union Pacific offices in a new 2-story building near the rail yard. A harried clerk informed them that Mr. Garrison was extremely busy, but might have time to see them briefly the following morning if they left their names. "Tell him it concerns a potential land dispute with Central Pacific in Nebraska Territory," Ethan instructed, "and that it's urgent." They secured rooms at a modest hotel near the station, with Billy practically vibrating with excitement at his first stay in a real town. After washing away the trail dust and changing into their cleanest remaining clothes, they met for supper in the hotel dining room. "What if Garrison won't see us?" Norah asked quietly as they waited for their food. "Or what if he's already committed to supporting Central Pacific's plans?" "Then we try another approach," Ethan replied. "Railroad executives care about one thing above all: profit. If we can convince Garrison that an alternative route would be more profitable for Union Pacific while causing problems for their competitors, he'll listen." Their meal was interrupted by the arrival of a hotel employee. "Mr. O'Malley, there's a gentleman asking for you in the lobby." Exchanging concerned glances with Norah, Ethan followed the employee, his hand resting near his holstered gun. In the lobby stood a well-dressed man in his 50s, with a neatly trimmed beard and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Mr. O'Malley," the man inquired. "I'm Philip Garrison, Union Pacific Railroad. I understand you were looking for me regarding a matter in Nebraska Territory." Surprised but pleased by this unexpected development, Ethan introduced himself properly and called Norah to join them. They moved to a quieter corner of the lobby where Garrison listened intently as they explained their situation, the threat to Evergreen, James Wilton's dealings with Central Pacific, and their proposal for an alternative route that would serve the railroad's interests while preserving the ranch. "Interesting," Garrison mused when they had finished. "Very interesting indeed. Central Pacific has been making aggressive moves in that region, trying to establish a presence before we can extend our line southeast from Cheyenne." He studied them thoughtfully. "Your proposed alternative route through the Henderson property, you're certain it's feasible from an engineering standpoint?" "The terrain is actually more favorable than through Evergreen," Norah assured him. "Less grading would be required, and there's a natural pass that would save considerable construction costs." Garrison nodded slowly. "I'd need to send surveyors to confirm, of course, but if what you say is accurate, this could be quite advantageous for Union Pacific." He leaned forward. "Tell me, Miss Campbell, would you be amenable to granting a right-of-way along the very northern edge of your property? Not cutting through the heart of the ranch as Central Pacific proposes, but just skimming the border. It would create an ideal junction point with the Henderson route." Norah glanced at Ethan, who gave a subtle nod of encouragement. "I would consider it," she replied carefully, "provided the terms were fair and the placement didn't interfere with Evergreen's operations." "Excellent," Garrison smiled, extending his hand. I believe we may be able to help each other, Miss Campbell. I'll have my assistant draw up preliminary papers in the morning, and we can discuss specifics then." As Garrison took his leave, promising to meet them at 9 the next morning, Norah barely contained her excitement. "Do you think he's genuinely interested? Or just being polite?" "Garrison didn't become a railroad executive by being polite," Ethan said with a smile. "He's interested all right. The question is whether we can finalize an agreement in time to stop Central Pacific's plans." The next morning, they met with Garrison in his office, where he presented a preliminary proposal for Union Pacific to secure rights to the alternative route, including a fair payment for the small portion of evergreen land that would be affected. "This is contingent on our surveyors confirming the route's viability, of course," Garrison cautioned. "But I'm prepared to offer a good faith payment immediately, with the balance due upon completion of the survey." The initial payment he named was substantial enough to cover nearly half of the remaining amount needed for the bank note. Combined with what they hoped to receive from the cattle sales in both Cheyenne and Kansas City, it might just be enough to save Evergreen. "There's one more thing," Norah said before accepting the offer. "We need assurance that Union Pacific will actively oppose Central Pacific's attempt to condemn Evergreen land for their competing route." Garrison's eyes narrowed slightly at her boldness, but then he nodded with grudging respect. "Union Pacific has considerable influence with the territorial authorities. I can guarantee our legal team will vigorously challenge any condemnation proceeding brought by our competitors that conflicts with our established interests in the region." With that assurance, Norah signed the preliminary agreement. As Garrison counted out the good faith payment in cash, he added casually, "By the way, I took the liberty of having my people research Mr. Wilton and his dealings with Central Pacific. It seems some of his land acquisitions may not have been entirely legitimate. Should those transactions be invalidated, it would severely undermine Central Pacific's planned route." Ethan and Norah exchanged surprised looks. "You've been investigating Wilton?" Ethan asked. Garrison smiled thinly. "Union Pacific protects its interests, Mr. O'Malley. We like to know who we're dealing with and who our competitors are dealing with." He handed the money to Norah. "I've already dispatched a survey team. They should reach Wood River within 2 weeks." As they left the Union Pacific offices with the payment secured in Norah's saddlebags, a weight seemed to lift from her shoulders. "I can hardly believe it," she said, blinking in the bright Wyoming sunshine. "We actually have a chance now." "We do," Ethan agreed, a rare wide smile transforming his usually serious face. "And we still have the cattle to sell here in Cheyenne before we head back." The local cattle buyer offered a fair price for their herd, impressed by the quality of Evergreen stock. With both the railroad payment and the cattle proceeds, Norah now had enough to cover 2/3 of the banknote, with hopes that Miguel's drive to Kansas City would make up the difference. Their business in Cheyenne concluded successfully. They prepared for the journey back to Evergreen. The return trip would be faster without cattle to drive, and they were all eager to reach home and learn how Miguel's group had fared. On their last night in Cheyenne, after Billy had gone to bed, Norah and Ethan sat in the hotel's small garden, enjoying a rare moment of peace. The summer evening was pleasantly cool, with stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Thank you," Norah said softly, breaking the comfortable silence between them, "for everything. I couldn't have done this without you." Ethan shook his head modestly. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Norah. You would have found a way." "Perhaps," she conceded, "but I'm glad I didn't have to find it alone." She hesitated, then added, "After James, I thought I'd never trust anyone again, especially not with something as important as Evergreen." "Trust has to be earned," Ethan said, his blue eyes meeting hers in the fading light. "Not given blindly." "You've earned it," she acknowledged. "One day at a time, one promise kept after another." Something shifted in Ethan's expression, a softening, a vulnerability he rarely showed. "There's one promise I haven't made yet," he said quietly, "because I wanted to be sure I could keep it before I spoke it aloud." Norah's heart quickened. "What promise is that?" "To stay," he said simply. "Not just as your foreman, but as whatever you might want me to be, partner, friend." He paused, then added softly, "More, if you ever feel ready for that." The words hung between them, charged with meaning. Norah had known for some time that her feelings for Ethan had grown beyond mere gratitude or professional respect, but fear had kept her from acknowledging it, even to herself. "I'm still healing," she whispered, echoing what she had told him on the porch at Evergreen. "Still learning to trust my own heart again." Ethan reached across the space between them, his hand finding hers. "I know, and I meant what I said before. I'll wait as long as it takes." In the gentle pressure of his calloused fingers around hers, Norah felt the sincerity of his words. This was not James's polished charm or calculated affection. This was something real, a steady, patient love that asked for nothing but offered everything. Before she could respond, a commotion from the street drew their attention. Raised voices and the sound of running feet broke the evening quiet. "What's happening?" Norah wondered, rising from her seat. A hotel employee hurried into the garden. "Telegram just came in from Nebraska Territory," he announced to the scattered guests. "Central Pacific Railroad survey team was attacked by Indians near Wood River. Several men killed." Norah and Ethan exchanged alarmed glances. "That can't be right," she said. "The Pawnee in our region have been peaceful for years." "It's not Indians," Ethan said grimly. "It's Wilton trying to delay Central Pacific's work until he can secure Evergreen through the bank note." He turned to Norah, his expression urgent. "We need to get back. Now." They departed Cheyenne at dawn the next morning, riding hard with only necessary stops. The journey that had taken 2 weeks with cattle now took just 5 days, with fresh horses purchased along the way. As they approached Wood River, evidence of the alleged Indian attack became clear: burned wagons and equipment along the proposed Central Pacific route, though notably without any actual casualties, despite the rumors. When they finally reached Evergreen, they were relieved to find the ranch untouched. Even more encouraging was the sight of Miguel and his crew. Already returned from Kansas City with good news, they had secured top prices for their cattle, bringing in enough to cover the remainder of the bank note with a small surplus. "The buyers couldn't get enough of our beef, Miss Norah," Miguel reported proudly. "Said it was the best they'd seen all season." The combined successes of both ventures meant that Norah now had enough to pay off the note in full, with additional funds to reinvest in Evergreen. And with Union Pacific surveyors already working on the alternative route, Central Pacific's threat to condemn the ranch was effectively neutralized. But James Wilton was not finished. 2 days before the bank note was due, as Norah was preparing to ride into town to make the payment, Sheriff Barnes arrived at Evergreen with 5 deputies. "I have a warrant for the arrest of Ethan O'Malley," Barnes announced formally, producing an official-looking document. "For bank robbery in Missouri in 1866, and for organizing the recent attack on the Central Pacific Survey team." "That's absurd," Norah protested. "Ethan was with me in Cheyenne when that attack happened." "We only have your word for that, Miss Campbell," Barnes replied coldly. "And given your relationship with the accused, your testimony might not be considered reliable." Ethan, who had emerged from the barn at the commotion, approached calmly. "Show me the warrant, Sheriff." Barnes handed it over, his hand resting meaningfully on his gun. Ethan examined the document carefully. "This is dated 3 years ago," he pointed out, "and it describes a man with a scar across his right cheek, which I don't have. Details can be mistaken," Barnes insisted. "You're still coming with me, O'Malley." "On whose authority?" came a new voice. Everyone turned to see a tall, distinguished-looking man riding into the ranch yard, accompanied by 2 other men. "Because it certainly isn't mine." "Marshal Caldwell," Barnes acknowledged, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." "Clearly," the federal marshal replied dryly, dismounting. "Otherwise you might not be serving falsified warrants. That document is a forgery, Sheriff Barnes, and I suspect Mr. James Wilton might know something about it." Norah stepped forward. "Marshal, what brings you to Evergreen?" Union Pacific Railroad requested federal oversight of their survey work following the recent disturbances, Caldwell explained. "When I arrived in Wood River, I found some rather interesting evidence suggesting the attack on the Central Pacific team was staged to look like Indian activity." He fixed Barnes with a stern look. "Evidence that pointed to Sheriff Barnes here, acting on behalf of James Wilton." Barnes sputtered denials, but his deputies were already backing away, unwilling to be associated with what was clearly becoming a serious legal problem. "I suggest you return to town, Sheriff," Marshal Caldwell said firmly, "and prepare to surrender your badge pending investigation. My deputies will escort you." As Barnes and his men departed, Caldwell turned to Norah and Ethan. "Miss Campbell, I presume, and Mr. O'Malley. Philip Garrison sends his regards. He also asked me to inform you that Union Pacific's board has officially approved the alternative route through the Henderson property, with the limited right-of-way along Evergreen's northern border as discussed." Relief washed over Norah. "And Central Pacific's condemnation proceedings suspended indefinitely," Caldwell confirmed with a small smile. "Particularly after evidence emerged of Mr. Wilton's fraudulent land acquisitions. It seems he forged signatures on quite a few deeds, including some allegedly signed by you, Miss Campbell. The pieces were falling into place." "And James?" Norah asked. "What happens to him?" "Mr. Wilton left town rather suddenly last night," Caldwell reported. "But with charges of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy pending against him, I doubt he'll be showing his face in Nebraska territory again anytime soon." The marshal didn't stay long, having official business to attend to in Wood River. As his party rode away, Norah turned to Ethan, still processing the rapid turn of events. "It's over," she said wonderingly. "We actually did it. Evergreen is safe." Ethan's smile was warm with both relief and something deeper. "You did it, Norah. Your determination, your refusal to give up, that's what saved your father's legacy." "With considerable help," she insisted, stepping closer to him, "from a man who kept every promise he made." Around them, the ranch continued its daily rhythms, cattle grazing in distant pastures, hands going about their chores, the afternoon sun bathing Evergreen in golden light. This place that had been her father's dream, then her burden, now felt like something new, a future waiting to be built. "About that promise you made in Cheyenne," Norah said softly, "the one about staying." Ethan's eyes held hers steadily. "I meant every word." "I'm still healing," she acknowledged, "still learning to trust again, but I'd like to try with you." She took his hand, feeling the strength and gentleness in his touch. "Not rushed, not forced, just one day at a time." "One promise at a time," Ethan agreed, his voice husky with emotion as he drew her closer. Their first kiss was gentle, a promise in itself of patience, of understanding, of a love built slowly and carefully on the solid foundation of trust regained. 1 year later, as summer again painted the Nebraska plains in gold, Norah stood on the porch of the Evergreen Ranch house, watching a rider approach. Ethan had been gone for 3 days, traveling to Omaha to finalize the last details of their partnership with Union Pacific. The railroad now ran along Evergreen's northern boundary, bringing new opportunities without sacrificing the heart of the ranch. Under Norah and Ethan's joint management, Evergreen had flourished, expanding its operations to include breeding stock that were now sought after throughout the territory. As Ethan dismounted and strode toward her, Norah felt the familiar flutter in her heart that his presence always evoked. Their courtship had progressed slowly, deliberately, each step taken with care, each promise made and kept building the bridge across her damaged trust. "Good news?" she asked as he climbed the porch steps. His smile was answer enough, but he elaborated anyway. "The contract is signed. Union Pacific has agreed to build a small station at the north corner of our land. Evergreen Station, they're calling it." "Father would have loved that," Norah said, slipping her hand into his. "A piece of his legacy helping to shape the future." "Speaking of legacies," Ethan said, his tone shifting to something more serious. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I have one more promise to make, Norah Campbell, the most important one yet." Her breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring set with a single perfect diamond. "Ethan." He took her hand, his blue eyes shining with love and certainty. "I promise to cherish you for all our days, to honor your strength, your courage, your beautiful heart, to build a life with you that would make your father proud." He paused, then asked simply, "Will you marry me, Norah?" Tears of joy filled her eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Norah marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From betrayal and broken trust to a love built painstakingly on kept promises and proven loyalty. Their lips met in a kiss that sealed this final promise, not an ending but a beginning, as they turned together to face the future of Evergreen and the life they would build there, one faithful day at a time. 5 years later, on a bright spring morning, Norah O'Malley stood in the doorway of Evergreen's ranch house, watching her husband teach their 3-year-old son Henry to sit on his first pony. The little boy's delighted laughter carried across the yard as Ethan led the gentle animal in a slow circle. "Careful, Matthew," she called to their 6-year-old, who was attempting to climb the corral fence for a better view. "Remember what happened last time." Matthew, the spitting image of his father with the same determined blue eyes, reluctantly climbed back down. "But I want to ride Thunder too, Mama." "When your brother's finished," she promised, adjusting the baby girl in her arms. Little Emma, just 6 months old and named for the wife Ethan had lost long ago, gurgled happily as she watched her brothers and father. In the years since their wedding, Evergreen had prospered beyond anything Norah could have imagined during those dark days after her father's death. The small station at the edge of their property had grown into a thriving shipping point for cattle from throughout the region. The ranch itself had expanded, with new breeding programs and modern techniques making Evergreen a model operation that ranchers came from far and wide to study. Miguel still worked as their head foreman, though he now had a comfortable house of his own on the property and spent more time teaching the younger hands than doing the heavy work himself. Billy Thompson had grown into a skilled cowboy and Ethan's right-hand man, with a young wife of his own in a cottage near the main house. As for James Wilton, he had never returned to Nebraska. Last they had heard, he was in California, trying his luck in various schemes but never achieving the success or wealth he had once seemed destined for. His betrayal, which had once seemed like the end of Norah's world, now felt like a distant storm that had ultimately cleared the way for sunshine. Ethan finished the pony ride and lifted little Henry down, the boy immediately running toward Norah with excited tales of his adventure. As her husband approached with Matthew now taking his turn on the pony, the love in Ethan's eyes still made Norah's heart skip a beat, even after all these years. "Happy?" he asked simply, leaning down to kiss her cheek and stroke baby Emma's downy hair. Norah looked around at their home, their children, the life they had built together, a life founded on promises made and kept, on trust shattered and rebuilt stronger than before. "Completely," she answered, and it was the purest truth she had ever spoken.